The town of Redemption Creek baked under a sun that offered no redemption at all, only a relentless, dusty glare. Down by the trickling artery of the river, Alara knelt, her focus absolute. Her fingers, stained with dirt and algae, sifted through the smooth, sun-warmed stones. To the rest of the town, she was the rock girl, a half-wild creature of 19 with dirt beneath her nails and a simple mind that found comfort in worthless things. At this moment, 3 local ranch hands, bored and mean with the heat, decided she was the day's entertainment. "Looky there," drawled one, a lanky boy named Jeb. Alara's count in her fortune again." His companion snickered. "What's it today, Alara?" The second one called out, his voice thick with mockery. "Found a pebble big enough to buy yourself a new dress?" That one's seen better days. Alara didn't look up. She felt their shadows fall over her, blocking the sun. She simply curled her shoulders inward, making herself smaller, and clutched a particularly smooth, gray stone to her chest. It was her favorite of the day, shaped like a bird's egg. "Leave her be." A voice cut through the air, low and steady as the river itself. The ranch hands turned. Silas Blackwood stood by the door of his smithy, hammer in hand, his leather apron dark with sweat and soot. He wasn't a large man, but he was forged of the same iron he worked, and his gaze carried a weight that made boys like Jeb feel flimsy. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. He just watched them, his expression unreadable, until they shuffled their feet, muttered something under their breath, and ambled away in search of easier sport. Alara heard their retreating laughter, but the sting was already fading, replaced by the quiet hum of Silas's presence. He didn't speak to her. He just gave a slight nod in her direction before disappearing back into the cavernous heat of his workshop. The rhythmic clang of his hammer on steel resumed, a sound that, for Alara, had become the town's only steady heartbeat. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and placed the egg-shaped stone into her heavy burlap sack. No one in Redemption Creek knew the weight of the secrets she carried, nor the value of the lonely solace she gathered from the riverbed. There's more to this rock girl than meets the eye. Before her true worth comes to light, tell us, have you ever misjudged someone only to be surprised? And if you love a story of hidden depths, hit like and subscribe. She packed her finds carefully, the smaller, prettier stones wrapped in scraps of cloth to prevent chipping. The prize, however, was unwrapped. It was a lumpen, ugly thing, heavy as a sin and dull as dishwater, covered in a chalky rind of quartz and grime. It was the size of a small loaf of bread and took 2 hands to lift properly. She'd found it wedged under a root 2 weeks prior, and its sheer, obstinate weight had fascinated her. It was her anchor, the heart of her collection. She hefted the sack onto her shoulder, the weight of it a familiar burden, and began the slow walk back to the dilapidated shack at the far edge of town that she called home. Alara had drifted into Redemption Creek a year ago, a solitary dust mote in the wind. She spoke little of her past, only that her family had been lost to fever on the trail west. The town, suspicious of anyone without clear lineage or purpose, had relegated her to the fringes. She did odd mending jobs for the church and swept the floors of the general store for scraps and day-old bread, but mostly, she kept to herself. Her obsession with the river rocks cemented her status as an outcast. While other girls her age worried about suitors and Sunday bonnets, Alara worried about the tide and the slow, geological secrets of the earth. Her shack was barely more than a lean-to, but inside, it was a museum of the river. Stones were everywhere, arranged on rickety shelves and lining the deep-set windowsill. There were slices of agate that held sunsets within them, smooth black basalt that felt cool even in the midday heat, and chunks of milky quartz that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Each one was a treasure, a silent friend in a world that had offered her little but scorn. She didn't see worthless pebbles. She saw stories of time, pressure, and survival. They were like her, she thought, overlooked, but possessed of a hard, quiet strength. Silas Blackwood watched her from a distance. A widower for 5 years, his life had contracted to the rhythmic world of his forge. The fire, the steel, the sweat. It was a simple, honest existence that left little room for the town's petty cruelties. He'd lost his wife and infant son to the same cholera that had swept through 3 years prior, and the loss had scoured him clean of idle chatter and easy judgment. He saw in Alara not a simpleton, but a survivor. He saw the way she carried herself, with a core of stillness that the taunts couldn't seem to penetrate. He saw the fierce protectiveness with which she guarded her sack of stones, and he respected it. It was a purpose, and purpose was a rare and valuable thing in a place like Redemption. His quiet observations were often punctuated by the town's casual disdain for the girl. One afternoon, while buying nails at Gable's general store, he saw Alara at the counter, her hand outstretched with 3 perfectly polished, speckled stones. "Please, Mrs. Gable," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just a small bag of flour." Mrs. Gable, a woman whose face seemed permanently pinched in disapproval, looked at the stones as if Alara had offered her a handful of mud. "This is a place of business, not a playroom," she sniffed, shooing her hand away. "I'm not trading good flour for your roadside trash." Alara's shoulders slumped. She gathered her stones without a word and turned to leave, her eyes fixed on the floorboards. As the door creaked shut behind her, Mrs. Gable looked at Silas and shook her head. "That girl is touched. Plain and simple. The town ought to do something about her." Silas merely leveled a flat gaze at the woman. "She's hungry, Martha," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Seems to me that's a sight more pressing than whether she's touched." He paid for his nails and a bag of flour, leaving the store with a grin set to his jaw. He didn't follow Alara. He knew his charity would shame her more than Mrs. Gable's cruelty. But the incident settled in him, a hot coal in the pit of his stomach. Life continued in its dusty, predictable rhythm until the stranger arrived. He rode in on a fine bay mare, not the dusty cow pony of a local, but a well-groomed animal with an expensive saddle. The man himself was just as out of place. He wore spectacles, a tweed jacket despite the heat, and carried himself with an air of academic purpose. He dismounted in front of Silas's smithy, his eyes scanning the rocky outcrops beyond the town with a professional, calculating gaze. "Good day," the man said, his voice crisp and educated. "My name is Alistair Abernathy. I'm a geologist. My horse has thrown a shoe." Silas nodded, gesturing for him to lead the mare inside. "Silas Blackwood. I can fix it." As Silas worked, Abernathy, unable to stand idle, prowled the perimeter of the smithy, tapping at the local stone foundations with a small, pointed hammer he produced from his saddlebag. He was full of questions about the region, the soil, the composition of the hills. Mostly granite and schist, Silas supplied, his attention on the glowing shoe in the forge. "Hard country. Doesn't give up much." "Everything gives up something, Mr. Blackwood," Abernathy countered with a smile. "One just needs to know how to look." It was then that Alara passed by on the other side of the street, her heavy sack slung over her shoulder. She was heading toward the general store, likely for another attempt to trade for sustenance. Abernathy's sharp eyes, trained to notice anomalies in the landscape, fixed on her immediately. It wasn't the girl that caught his attention, but the awkward, immense weight of the sack she carried and the way she strained under its load. He saw her stop outside the store, hesitating. She pulled out a few of her prettier stones, polishing them on her sleeve. Silas watched from the shadows of his forge as Mrs. Gable came to the door, saw Alara, and simply shook her head, turning back inside without a word. The rejection was swift and absolute. Dejected, Alara adjusted her heavy sack, and in the movement, the ugly, loaf-sized stone shifted, its dull, grimy surface catching the light for a moment. Abernathy's posture changed. The casual curiosity sharpened into a razor-like focus. Silas finished shoeing the horse and let it out, wiping his hands on a rag. "That should hold you to wherever you're headed," he said. But Abernathy wasn't looking at his horse. His gaze was locked on Alara, who was now trudging away from the store, her head bowed. "Tell me, Mr. Blackwood," the geologist said, his voice tight with a strange excitement. "Who is that young woman?" "That's Alara," Silas said, his own voice guarded. "She keeps to herself." "And what is in that sack?" "Rocks," Silas answered simply. Abernathy paid Silas, his movements quick and distracted. "Thank you for your excellent work," he said, but his eyes were already following Alara's path. He started after her, not with a hurried stride, but with the deliberate, patient pace of a hunter who has just spotted rare and unexpected prey. Silas watched him go, the hot coal in his stomach flaring into a low, protective fire. The world, it seemed, was about to descend on Alara's quiet life, and he wasn't sure if it was bringing salvation or a new, more terrible kind of ruin. The sight of the well-dressed stranger approaching the town's simpleton was enough to draw curious onlookers. Mrs. Gable appeared on her storefront porch, arms crossed. A few dusty cowboys paused their whittling on a nearby bench. They expected the stranger to ask for directions, perhaps to shoo the girl out of his way. They expected him to see what they all saw, a nobody. "Excuse me, miss," Abernathy said, his tone polite and deferential. Alara flinched, expecting another taunt. She clutched her sack and tried to sidestep him, but he moved with her. "I don't mean to startle you," he said gently. "My name is Abernathy. I am a geologist. That means I study rocks. I couldn't help but notice your collection." She stared at him, her eyes wide with suspicion. No one had ever called it a collection before. They called it her junk, her trash, her madness. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the sack. Hesitantly, as if revealing a profound secret, she lowered the sack to the ground. The onlookers chuckled. The stranger was just another fool, amusing himself with the local oddity. Alara opened the top, showing him the carefully wrapped agates and quartz. He glanced at them with polite interest, but his eyes were searching for something else. "I saw another one," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "A larger one. Very dull. May I see it?" Her hand went to the lumpen stone instinctively. It was her anchor, her secret, but there was no mockery in the man's eyes, only a keen, almost hungry, curiosity. Slowly, she maneuvered the heavy rock into view. Abernathy knelt, ignoring the dust soiling his fine trousers. He produced his small hammer and a magnifying lens from his coat pocket. The townsfolk leaned in, their amusement turning to bafflement. He tapped the stone lightly. A chip of the chalky white rind flaked away. Underneath, something glittered with a heavy, buttery yellow light. It wasn't a sparkle, it was a gleam, a deep, dense luster that seemed to drink the sunlight. A collective gasp went through the small crowd. Abernathy breathed a single word, a reverent whisper. "Incredible!" He scraped away another piece of the quartz crust, revealing more of the warm, metallic sheen beneath. He looked up at Alara, his academic composure completely gone, replaced by the ecstatic face of a man who had just discovered a new continent. "My dear girl," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "do you have any idea what this is?" Alara shook her head, her heart pounding against her ribs. "This is not a rock," he announced, his voice carrying across the dusty street. "It is a gold nugget. A placer nugget of a size and purity I have never seen in this territory. It's a museum piece. A fortune." The silence that followed was absolute, thick with the weight of shattered perceptions. Scorn curdled into avarice. Alara, the simple rock girl, was standing on the edge of a precipice, and the whole town was watching, their eyes no longer filled with pity, but with a raw, dangerous greed. From the doorway of his smithy, Silas saw the change. He saw Mayor Croft, a portly, self-important man, detach himself from the porch of the land office. He saw Jeb and his friends exchange wide-eyed, calculating looks. The mockery that had surrounded Alara like a thorny hedge was gone, but in its place stood a circle of wolves. He set his hammer down and walked slowly, deliberately, across the street, coming to a stop just behind her. He didn't say a word, but his presence was a shield. He was no longer just an observer. That evening, the news had saturated every corner of Redemption Creek. The story grew with each telling. The simple rock girl had stumbled upon the legendary Mother Lode. She was richer than the railroad baron who owned half the territory. Alara, overwhelmed and terrified by the sudden, suffocating attention, had fled to her shack, barricading the flimsy door. Silas found her there an hour after sunset. He'd brought a stew from the saloon and a loaf of bread. He knocked softly. "Alara? It's Silas." It took a long time for her to unbar the door. She looked pale and haunted in the flickering lantern light. Her treasures were arrayed around her, as if for protection. "I'm not hungry," she said, her voice a threat. "You need to eat," he said simply, stepping inside and placing the food on her small, rough-hewn table. He didn't press her, didn't ask about the gold. He just sat with her in the small, cluttered space, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. Finally, she spoke. "They all hate me," she whispered. No, Silas corrected gently. They hated that you were poor and strange. Now they hate that you're rich and strange. The hate's the same, Elara. It's the reason that's changed. He looked around the shack, at the carefully arranged stones. You were never collecting rocks, were you? She looked up, surprised by the question. They're beautiful, she said. They don't lie. They are what they are. Solid. You can count on them. He understood then. It wasn't madness. It was a search for permanence in a life that had been nothing but fleeting and fragile. He looked at the ugly lump of gold, now sitting in the center of the table. That one's not like the others. No, she agreed. It's heavy. It makes people's eyes go strange. Their quiet meal was a temporary sanctuary. The next morning, the town's greed took on a formal, official shape. Mayor Croft, flanked by the town sheriff, a man whose loyalty was bought and paid for by Croft's interests, arrived at her shack. Miss Elara, the mayor began, his voice oozing of false paternalism. A wonderful discovery. A boon for the whole community. Elara stood in her doorway, with Silas, who had arrived just minutes before, standing beside her. However, Croft continued, his tone hardening, there is the matter of legality. The river and its banks are public land. As such, anything of significant value found there belongs to the township of Redemption Creek, to be used for the public good. You mean you're good? Silas cut in, his voice dangerously low. Croft ignored him. We are prepared to offer you a generous finder's fee, of course. $100. A fine sum for a girl like you. You will deliver the specimen to my office by noon tomorrow. If you refuse, we will have no choice but to press charges for theft of public property. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. $100 for a fortune. It wasn't an offer, it was an ultimatum. They left, confident in their power, leaving Elara trembling. What do I do? She asked Silas, her eyes welling with tears. They'll take it. They'll take everything. Silas looked from her frightened face to the greedy town beyond. His quiet, solitary life was over. He had stepped across a line the day before, and there was no going back. He had to make a choice. He could advise her to take the money and run, to save herself. Or he could stand with her, against the whole town. He met her gaze, and in that moment, he saw not just a scared girl, but the resilient woman who had found beauty in stones, who had survived a year of scorn with quiet dignity. His choice was clear. No, he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even himself. They will not take it. You found it. It's yours. They spent the night in his smithy, the safest place he could think of. The great nugget sat on his anvil, its dull gleam seeming to absorb the firelight. While Elara finally slept, exhausted, on a cot in the corner, Silas thought. He was a blacksmith, a man of iron and fire, not law and words. But he was also an honest man, and he knew injustice when he saw it. He couldn't fight them with force. He had to fight them with the truth. As dawn broke, he found Mr. Abernathy at the town's only hotel, preparing to depart. Silas laid out the situation. The geologist, a man of facts and integrity, listened intently, his brow furrowed with indignation. This is an outrage, Abernathy declared. This is a clear case of claim jumping, even if the claim is unconventional. They have no legal right. He looked at Silas. That young woman has a formidable ally in you, Mr. Blackwood. She just needs a fair chance, Silas said. I was hoping you might be willing to provide one. Abernathy smiled, a glint in his eye. I believe I can do better than that. At 5 minutes to noon, the town square was a theater of anticipation. Mayor Croft stood on the steps of his office, the sheriff at his side. The crowd was a mix of the greedy, the curious, and the cruel, all waiting to see the simple rock girl broken and robbed. Elara appeared, walking from the direction of the smithy. She wasn't alone. Silas was on one side of her, and Mr. Abernathy, looking crisp and official, was on the other. Elara was carrying her old burlap sack, but it was no longer weighed down. In her hands, she held one small, smooth, gray stone, the one shaped like a bird's egg. Croft's face tightened when he saw she wasn't carrying the gold. Well, miss, he boomed, trying to seize control. Have you come to your senses? Elara took a deep breath. She looked at Silas, who gave her a barely perceptible nod. She found her voice, and though it trembled, it carried across the silent square. For a year, she began, you have all watched me by the river. You call me a fool. You called my stones trash. She held up the gray stone. You said this was worthless. You laughed at me for loving it. She then looked directly at the mayor. Now, you want the other one. Because it's not worthless. But you can't have it both ways. You can't declare my life's work garbage one day and town treasure the next, just because it suits your pocket. A murmur went through the crowd. Her simple logic was undeniable. Silas stepped forward. For months, this town has decided that what Alara collects is valueless. By your own unanimous judgment, she has been collecting nothing but discarded refuse. Well, she has a right to her refuse. This is her piece of it. You can't change the rules now just because one piece of her trash turned out to be gold. He let the hypocrisy hang in the air, thick and shameful. Mayor Croft's face turned purple with rage. That is absurd. The law is the law. Sheriff, take the nugget from her. Search the smithy if you have to. That will not be necessary, Mr. Abernathy said, stepping forward and holding up a piece of paper. And I would advise against it. His voice was calm, but carried the cold authority of law and capital. This is a copy of a telegram sent to the territorial capital late last night. It registers a preliminary mineral claim on behalf of my employer, the United Mining Consortium, with Miss Alara as the sole discoverer and beneficiary. It also contains a formal bill of sale, transferring ownership of the specific assayed nugget to my company upon payment. The full weight of our legal department is now behind Miss Alara's title. I assure you, Mayor, their resources far exceed yours. He let that sink in. Then he produced a leather satchel. And this, he said, opening it to reveal stacks of crisp banknotes, is her payment, which I will now conduct, publicly, as a final seal on the transaction. The mayor was defeated, humiliated. He was a big fish in a tiny, dusty pond, and a shark had just entered the water. He sputtered, but no words came. The crowd, sensing the massive shift in power, began to quietly disperse, unwilling to be associated with his failed, greedy plot. Abernathy counted out the money into Alara's trembling hands. It was an impossible sum, a wall of paper between her old life and whatever came next. The geologist tipped his hat. It has been a privilege, miss. You have a remarkable eye. With that, he and two men he'd hired retrieved the nugget from the smithy and were gone. Alara stood in the now empty square, the fortune in her hands, with Silas beside her. The money felt alien, weightless compared to the stones she was used to. She looked at it, then at Silas's strong, soot-stained hands. She knew what was real. She turned to him, her voice clear and steady. Silas, she said, I want to be a partner. In the smithy, we could buy new tools, expand. Make it the best in the territory. We could build something. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a payment. It was an offer. A future. For the first time, she was not the one being acted upon, but the one choosing her path. He looked at her, at the quiet strength that had been there all along, now shining for the world to see. A slow smile spread across his face. I think, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in years, I'd like that very much. They walked away from the center of town, leaving the whispers and the jealousy behind. They didn't go to her shack, but to his smithy. She placed the banknotes on his workbench, a strange sight next to the hammers and tongs. But in her other hand, she still clutched the small, gray stone shaped like a bird's egg. She set it down carefully on the edge of the stone hearth, a piece of the river, a piece of her, now a part of his world. Silas picked it up, its smooth, simple weight feeling more real in his calloused palm than all the money in the world. He looked at the stone, then at her. He saw the woman who had been mocked for seeing value where others saw none. And he knew, with the certainty of forged steel, that she had been right all along. The gold was just a rock, but this quiet trust, this shared strength, this new beginning forged in the fire of adversity, was the real treasure. Her true worth was finally seen. What does true value in a person mean to you? Tell us below. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more.